Welcome to the Spotlight On video. In this video, we're going to run through configuring Extender automatic workflows. The topics we're going to cover are what are automatic workflows, what software is required for configuring and using automatic workflows. We're going to run through an example workflow template on AP Payment Batch, where we're going to have a two-step level of approvals, one to make it ready to post and the second to post the AP Payment Batch. And then we're going to test the workflow template and see the inquiries and console that we have to work with the workflow template. Automatic workflows are started automatically by Extender. And this can be done either when a field on a view changes, for example, when the batch status changes, automatically start the workflow, or it can be attached to a view insert, update, or delete. Workflows can also be automatically started by Process Scheduler by running your own script, which starts the workflow. The main thing of a workflow is the can start manually must be set to no. Whereas manual workflows are started by a user on a Sage 300 screen, or they can also be started by your own script, and their can start manually flag would be set to yes. For automatic workflows, you need Extender, either the configurator, customizer, or developer edition. Depending on the complexity of your workflow, you may need configurator if all you need are the out-of-the-box actions that come with configurator. But if you need to create your own custom actions, then you need the customizer edition of Extender. And if you need custom tables to support your custom actions, then you need the developer edition of Extender. And that allows you to create your workflow template and to start your workflow template. But to work with the workflow console or to configure workflow icons on Sage 300 screens, you need Orchid users as well. And if you do want to schedule workflows to start at a specific point in time, then you would need Process Scheduler and write your own custom script to start the workflow. What we're going to go through in this Spotlight On video is Extender Configurator Edition, and we're going to use Orchid users to access the workflow console. The workflow template we're going to build is around the AP Payment Batch. Users entering the AP Payment Batch can request their batch to be set as ready to post. And then a group of users are able to approve or reject that ready to post status. If the ready to post status is approved, then a second group of users are able to approve and post the batch or reject the posting. When the user has entered and printed their checks, they can use the AP Payment Batch list to mark the batch as ready to post. And an email will be sent to the first approver group, and they will be able to either approve and set the batch as ready to post or reject, and the batch would be left as in an open status. And if the first approver group approve the ready to post, the second approver group will get an email, and from there they can either approve and post the batch or reject the batch and leave it in the status of ready to post. Looking at the requirement another way, what we want with this AP payment workflow is a separation of duties between those who can enter the batch, those who can make the batch ready to post, and those who can post the batch, building on top of Sage security groups, making it more granular, auditable, and visible. So first of all, those users who have the ability to create AP payment batches and print checks are going to go ahead, and when they're ready and want to make it ready to post, they will change the batch status to ready to post. And that will be the trigger for the workflow instance to start, because the workflow will be attached to the batch status field. So as soon as they change the batch status field, the workflow instance is going to kick in and check if it needs to be approved. It may not need to be approved if they haven't changed the status to ready to post. If they've changed it to something else, then it does not need to be approved. We can complete that workflow instance. But if it does need approval because they've set it to ready to post, we're going to send an email to the approver and wait for the approver to approve or reject. So when somebody clicks the approval button, if the approver equals the starter, then we're just going to show them a message and come back and wait for approval for somebody other than the starter in the same group. But if it isn't the starter, if they've rejected, we will send an email with the reject reason and complete the workflow. But if they've accepted, we're going to set the batch ready to post. We're going to send an email to the approver and then wait for the approver to post the batch. If the approver rejects the batch, we're going to send an email and leave the batch in the ready to post status and complete the workflow. However, if they approve the post approval, we're going to post the batch and send an email to the starter. And all this interaction with the workflow instance will be done on the workflow console. For the AP payment batch approval, we have two extender user groups that are used in the approval process. The first user group is the Enter RTP Pay user group, in which Albert, Anne, Dan, and Stacey are members, and they are able to enter and make a payment batch ready to post. The second user group is PostPay, which Steve and Natalie are members of, and they are able to only post an AP payment. They're not able to make it ready to post or enter it. Signed in as Albert, once I have entered and printed my payment batch and printed the checks, I can mark it ready to post. And the workflow is automatically triggered because the workflow is attached to the batch status field. And I get a message saying that the workflow instance has started. An email has been sent to all in the Enter Ready to Post Pay group, and the batch status has been set back to open. And in the workflow console, I see my batch, and it's waiting for members of the Enter Ready to Post Pay group for batch 71. Because I'm a member of that group, I can go ahead and approve this. But we have a validation in the workflow template that the submitter cannot approve their own batch. But I could go ahead and either reject or accept Dan's batch that was submitted previously. So if I go ahead and say, yes, we approve this, an email is sent to the posting groups, and because I'm not as part of the posting group, then I will no longer see this particular workflow instance on my console. And logging in as Natalie, I see on my workflow console, I see this batch that was started by Dan. And it has been set ready to post, and it's waiting for me to approve and post the batch. I can drill down to the underlying payment batch screen to look at the entries in payment batch 69. I can look at the history, so what has happened so far on this particular workflow. I can see it was first submitted by Dan and waiting for ready to post. It was then made ready to post by Albert and is now waiting for post approval. And I can click into the values, and I can see it was Albert who did the posting and all the particular values that have been saved away with this particular workflow template. So as a member of the PostPay group, I can either reject or accept and post it. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, post the batch. You can see the batch posts, and this workflow instance is now complete. I know that because there is no next step name. And had my template said delete from the console when complete, this line would have removed from the active console but still be in the history. In order to run through the setup required for this AP Payments workflow, I'm going to use the Extender Workflow Visual Process Flow. Initially, in Admin Services, we create accounts payable groups so that some users cannot post the AP payment batch, and some users cannot enter the AP payment batch. They can only post the AP payment batch. And then we would go and assign the users to those groups. And then for Extender, in order to send emails, in the Extender options, you need to fill in your SMTP details. And you need to create your message templates for the emails that you want to send. And in our case, we had different email templates when we wanted to make the batch ready to post, when we approved ready to post, or approved or rejected ready to post, and the same when we posted the batch. And in your email templates, you can use the variables from the workflow instance that triggers this particular email. And then we need to define our user groups. So we had two, enter ready to post pay, and members of this group could accept or reject the ready to post request. And then we have the post pay user group, and members of this group could accept or reject the posting of the batch. Our workflow did not make use of color, but you can set up colors and have your workflow instances colored on the workflow console. And the next setup is to define your workflow templates. Workflow templates have steps, actions, progress to steps, and values. Having a look at our workflow template, the main thing about automatic workflows is can start manually is set to no. And when you have can start manually set to no, then can start multiple instances will always be set to yes. So every time the field or record is changed, depending where you attach your workflow, a workflow instance will be started and you need to cater for it. Workflow steps are defined here, and each step can have many actions, and a step may have progress to steps. In this case, the wait for ready to post can progress to yes, ready to post, or no, ready to post. And a workflow can have values. But it's much easier to create your workflow template if you're working off a flowchart which has the logic for your template. Looking at our high-level flowchart that we reviewed earlier, we can see we have a few steps which relate to our entry step, and that is simply for ease of reading, and we'll go through the reasons for that later. And then we have the waiting for ready to post approval step, where it goes to either reject or approve, and then we have waiting for post approval, where again we can either reject or approve. And once you have your main steps, you could then go step by step and do a detailed flowchart and then translate the individual steps off as the actions. The detailed flowchart for the entry step is like this. When the user changes the batch status, the entry step is started every time the batch status is changed. So first thing, we're going to set the drill down so we can drill back to the AP payment batch, set any workflow variables that we need to set the description for the workflow on the console, and then evaluate, did the user change the status to ready to post? If they did not, this particular workflow instance is not required. So we can set the status not required, set any values that we want to, and complete the instance. But if they did change it to ready to post, then what we want to do is straight away set it back to open and then continue our workflow. So the first thing we need to check is there already an open workflow for this particular batch? So we can use an action called if workflow exists. If we've already got a workflow for this particular batch, that means it was made ready to post previously. Then what we need to do is complete this instance straight away because the workflow already exists. And we can use the show user warning. So we can say if they did this change on the AP payment batch screen or the batch listing screen, we can show a message that there's a pending approval already in process and then complete this particular instance. But if the workflow doesn't already exist, so this is the first time they've asked it to be made ready to post, then we're going to set some more variables, set the comment for the console, and then if they're using the AP invoice entry screen, we're going to show a message that the workflow instance has been started, send the email to the group who are going to make it ready to post, and then wait for the ready to post approval. And now looking at our entry step more closely, we can see it has two parameters, one for the group who can make it ready to post, and the second for the group who can post it. The first thing we do is set the drill down so that you're able to drill back to the AP payment batch. And then we're setting the variable WF ready to post to $1, which is our parameter. So we know the user group that can make it ready to post. The second thing we set is the WF post variable, which is the user group who can post the batch. And we set the description for the workflow console. And then we evaluate, does the batch status equal 7? 7 is ready to post, i.e. have they set it ready to post? If they have, we go to step 60. If they haven't, we go to step 80. So in the case where they've changed it to something other than ready to post, it must go to step 80, which is this branch complete, ready to post approval not required. But in the case where they did set it to ready to post, it's going to go to step 60, which is setting the batch status field back to 1, which is open. And if that's successful, it then goes to the step request ready to post approval. If it's not successful, and a case where it may not be successful is if the user clicking the button on the workflow console doesn't have the Sage security group to work with the batch status, then we're going to get an error message, in which case we're going to go to step 90 and we're going to send admin an error message saying that we've had a problem in this workflow template. So if they did set the batch status to 7, it's going to go to step request ready to post approval, and this particular step progresses the workflow further. So the next thing it requests is if workflow exists, and the action workflow exists looks for a instance which is still active for this particular template name and for the batch number that we're working on. So if it does, then the true condition is to go to step 90, which is complete workflow is currently active, and the complete workflow is currently active. If the screen that they're using is our AP payment batch screen, then give them a message and say that there is already a workflow instance for this particular batch and complete the instance. But otherwise, if a workflow doesn't exist, then it's going to set the status to ready to post requested, set our comment, assign the user to our ready to post group, evaluate if the program they're using is AP3000, which is our AP payment batch list, then we're going to show them a message that we've submitted, the workflow instance has been created, send an email to the ready to post group, and then go to wait for ready to post. And our wait ready for post is the step which has two progressed tos, yes ready to post or no ready to post, and that correlates to the two buttons on our workflow template. And if they reject the ready to post request, we're going to set some variables and set the status of the workflow. We're going to prompt the user for a reject reason. And then if the reason has been entered, we're going to set the workflow comment and status, send an email back to the starter, and complete this instance. If they escaped out of the reject reason screen, it would come back to the wait for ready to post approval. And if they accept the ready to post request, first we'll check if the user equals the starter, in which case we will show the user a message and go back to wait for ready to post approval. But if it's not the starter, we'll set the batch status to ready to post, We'll set some workflow values and the description and the status for the workflow console, and we'll assign the posting user group as the assigned user for the workflow instance and send an email to the user group. And then we'll go and wait for posting approval. And the wait for posting approval is a progress to step, which has a reject the post request and an accept the post request. If they reject the post request, we will set the workflow console status and comments. We will prompt the user for a reject reason. If the reason's been entered, we will update the workflow comment and status, send an email, and complete this instance. If they escape out of the reject reason entry box, we will go back to the wait for post approval. But if they accept the post request, then we'll go ahead and post the batch, set the workflow values who posted the batch, and send an email to all those concerned and complete the instance. After creating the template, for automatic workflows, you need to go and associate that workflow with the view that you want it to automatically be triggered on. And in our case, we want it to be associated with the AP0030, the AP payment and adjustment batches. And the workflow is to be attached to the batch status field. So every time the batch status field starts, the workflow will be triggered. And this is the workflow that will be run. And this is the step that will be started. And we're passing in two parameters, the user group who can set it ready to post, and the user group who can post the AP payment batches. And the final configuration we need to do for all the users that are going to use the workflow console is configure the tray icon such that this particular user, and this is a user by user setting, is an Orchid user. But we don't have any workflow icons on the AP payment batch, so we don't need to go and configure workflow icons for that particular screen. In order to demonstrate the different branches of this AP payment batch workflow, we're going to work with two batches. The first one, entered by Albert, the checks have been printed, and Albert makes it ready to post. And the workflow is automatically triggered, and Albert gets the message. The second payment batch we're going to work with is batch 74, entered and printed by Dan, and Dan makes it ready to post. And the workflow is automatically triggered, and Dan gets the message accordingly. Logging in as Anne, I have access to the workflow console because I'm an Orchid user, and I can view all the entries in the workflow console because I have the Extender security group. View all workflows. And I know the first 4 workflow instances are complete because they have no next step name. And these instances would have been removed from the console and left only in the history if I had set auto delete workflow instance when complete to yes. And looking at these workflow instances together with our flowchart, when Dan first created the AP payment batch, the status was 8, check creation in progress. And then when the checks were printed, the batch status went to open. And because this workflow template is an automatic workflow attached to the batch status field, each time the batch status field changes, a workflow instance is created. Initially, when the batch is created, the status is 8, check creation in progress. So the workflow sets the variables, checks to see whether the status is ready to post, which is 7, and because it's not, it goes and sets the workflow status to approval not required, sets the description, and completes this instance. Similarly, when the checks are printed, the batch status goes to open, which is 1, and a workflow instance is started. But because the batch status is not 7, it will automatically be completed after setting the variables and the status. And the same applies to the next 2 instances when Albert created, printed, and saved the payment batch. And still signed in as Anne using the workflow console and only viewing those workflow instances which are assigned to me or a group I'm in, I see both batch 75 and 74 are waiting for ready to post approval. And as a member of the Enter RTP Payer group, I could go ahead and say yes to accept or no to reject either of these two batches. If anyone who has the AP security to make the batch ready to post, they will get an error message saying that there is a workflow already active for this particular batch and it needs to be approved on the workflow console. But our template has automatically created a workflow instance for this, and we can see this record in the workflow summary log. And this workflow instance is created by this particular branch in the workflow. Did the user set the batch status to ready to post? Yes. Set it back to open. Does a workflow exist for this particular batch number? Yes. So it goes to this step, complete workflow instance already exists. Checks to see if they're using the AP screen. If so, gives them a message, and then completes the workflow with a comment saying that the workflow instance already exists and completes this instance. And signed in as Dan, I have access to the workflow console because I have been configured as an Orchid user. And when I view all workflow instances that are assigned to me or a group I'm in, I see the two batches that have been flagged as requesting ready to post because I am a member of the Enter RTP Pay group. And because this workflow instance is in the wait ready to post state, I see two progress to buttons, yes ready to post, no ready to post. And if I click yes ready to post, I get this error message, you can't approve the batch that you submitted for approval. And this is because of this particular branch in our workflow. On the console, the next step is wait ready to post approval, with the two progress to steps, reject or accept. And when we click accept, the first thing it does is check, is the user clicking accept equal to the starter? If it is, show the message and go back to wait ready to post approval. Now signed in as Anne, I see the two batches which are waiting for the ready to post approval because I'm a member of the Enter RTP Pay group. And if I go ahead and reject this first batch, and it is prompting me for the reject reason, but if I cancel or close here and refresh my console, I can see that workflow instance is still in the same wait ready to post branch. But I'll go ahead again and reject this one and give a reject reason. And when I go OK, we see that this particular instance has no step name, which means it's now complete. And if we look at the history, it was in the wait ready to post state, and Anne went to cancel, but then escaped out of the cancel screen, and then in the wait ready to post state, then rejected. And this is the email that was sent to all concerned. And still signed on as Anne, looking at the other batch, I could drill down to see the underlying transaction. And if I was happy, I could go ahead and say, yes, make this batch ready to post. So the batch is being set ready to post, an email is being sent to the posting group, and this particular workflow instance was reassigned to those in the posting group. And we can see we can include variables from the workflow in our email. So batch 74 submitted by Dan has been made ready to post by Anne, who's a member of Enter Ready to Post Pay group. And signed in as Natalie, I can see all those items on my console that are assigned to me or a group I'm in, and I'm a member of the Post Pay group. I can look at the history, and I can see the batch was first submitted by Dan, and then Dan attempted to make it ready to post, but presumably got an error message saying you cannot make your own batch ready to post. And then Anne went into the reject reason, but cancelled out of the reject reason screen. And then Anne went ahead and made it ready to post. And if I look at the values, because the workflow template stored away the member of the Enter Ready to Pay group who did the approval, I can see it was Anne. So if I go ahead now and post this batch, we can see the batch posts. And now I can see the next step name is blank. It is therefore complete. And clicking on the history and the values, we can see the full history of what's happened to this workflow instance. And we can also see the email that was sent to everyone when the batch was posted. We have seen the setup required for our AP payment batch workflow. We had to create users in admin services, create extender user groups, create workflow colors, and email message templates. And then we needed to create our workflow template. We needed to create steps, variables, actions for our steps, and progress to steps. And for this, it was advantageous to first do our workflow in a flowchart and then translate it into the equivalent steps and actions. And then we had to link our workflow to the AP payment batch view and to the particular field, in our case, the batch status. And after doing that setup, we went ahead and started the workflow by changing the AP payment batch status. We progressed the workflow by using the workflow console. And we did inquiries into the workflow by using the workflow console and using the workflow summary log. Thank you for your time. For more information on Extender and workflows, please go to our website www.orchid.systems.